In 1900, Dawn of the Century featured an illustration of the Angel of Progress with a flag of the new century, symbolizing a new era. The image showcased progress with railways, machines, printing presses, and factories. Another image depicted Aladdin representing the past and the East, and a modern mechanic symbolizing the West, highlighting the celebration of technology and modernity over a century ago. Such symbolism shapes perceptions. These images conveyed a triumphant tale of rapid technological progress, industrialization, and modernity, featuring railways, factories, and innovation. They shaped our modern perception of industrialization, but it's crucial to examine its impact on people's lives and how our understanding of it has evolved over time, delving into its history. In this video, we'll examine this history, starting with Britain, the first industrialized nation, and then India, where industrial change was shaped by colonial rule. Make sure to subscribe to never miss any episodes. It will add value to your preparation. Let us begin from the beginning. Before the Industrial Revolution, our perceptions of industrialization are often associated with factories and factory workers. However, even before factories became prominent in England and Europe, there was a phase known as proto-industrialization. Here, proto means pre or before. This period, in the 17th and 18th centuries, witnessed large-scale industrial production for international markets, but not within factories. During this time, European merchants moved from towns to the countryside. They provided financial support to peasants and artisans, encouraging them to produce goods for the growing international market. As world trade expanded and European powers acquired colonies worldwide, the demand for goods increased. However, urban crafts and trade guilds had a strong presence in towns and controlled production. Merchants could not easily expand their businesses within these towns, leading them to turn to the countryside. In rural areas, poor peasants and artisans began working for these merchants. Many had small plots of land, but needed additional income to sustain themselves, as common lands were being enclosed. The merchant advances allowed them to remain in the countryside while supplementing their income through production. This system created a close relationship between towns and the countryside, with merchants controlling the production process. This proto-industrial system was part of a commercial network, where merchants oversaw production by a vast number of workers, not in factories but within their family farms. At each stage of production, several workers were employed by each merchant, demonstrating their significant influence. The first factories in England emerged in the 1730s, but it was in the late 18th century that their numbers began to multiply. The cotton industry became a symbol of this new era, with a significant increase in the import of raw cotton. A series of inventions in the 18th century enhanced the efficiency of production processes, enabling workers to produce more and resulting in stronger threads and yarn. Richard Arkwright's cotton mill brought all processes under one roof, offering better quality control and labor regulation. However, even as factories became more visible, traditional industries did not disappear. Textiles, a dynamic sector, still involved production outside of factories within domestic units. Moreover, the pace of technological change was gradual. Technological innovations occurred in various non-mechanized sectors, such as food processing and building. The adoption of new technology was cautious, as it was expensive, and machines were prone to breakdowns and repairs. Even the steam engine, a revolutionary invention, was slow to be adopted by industrialists, with only a limited number in use across England. Historians have come to recognize that in the mid-19th century, the typical worker was often a traditional craftsperson or laborer, rather than a machine operator. In Victorian Britain, there was an abundant supply of human labor. The influx of poor peasants and vagrants into cities in search of employment resulted in a situation where there was no shortage of workers, leading to low wages. Industrialists, therefore, faced no labor shortages or high wage costs, which made them reluctant to introduce machinery that would replace human labor and require substantial capital investment. Many industries had seasonal labor demands. For example, gasworks and breweries were busiest in the cold months, requiring additional workers during peak seasons. Bookbinders and printers catering to Christmas demand also needed extra hands before December. In such industries where production fluctuated with the seasons, industrialists typically preferred employing manual labor on a seasonal basis. Certain products required the skills of hand labor, as machines were primarily suited for producing standardized goods for a mass market. In mid-19th century Britain, there were 500 varieties of hammers and 45 kinds of axes, which demanded human craftsmanship rather than mechanical technology. In Victorian Britain, the upper classes, including the aristocrats and bourgeoisie, favored handcrafted products. Handmade items symbolized refinement and class, as they were individually produced, carefully designed, and better finished. Machine-made goods were primarily intended for export to the colonies. In countries with labor shortages, industrialists were eager to use mechanical power to reduce their dependence on human labor. This was the case in 19th century America. However, Britain had an ample supply of human labor and did not face the same pressures to automate. Let us look into how workers used to live of that time. Please smash the like button if you find this video informative. It will be a great help and moral boost for us. Moving on, the surplus of labor in the market had a profound impact on the lives of workers. Prospects of securing jobs often depended on social networks, such as friendships and kin relations. Those with relatives or friends in factories had a higher likelihood of finding employment, while many job seekers had to endure long waits, spending nights under bridges or in night shelters. Some resorted to night refuges set up by private individuals, while others sought assistance from the casual wards maintained by poor law authorities. The seasonal nature of work in many industries meant extended periods of unemployment. After the busy season, many found themselves back on the streets. Some returned to the countryside, where demand for labor in rural areas opened up seasonal opportunities. However, finding odd jobs, especially until the mid-19th century, was challenging. Wages did increase somewhat in the early 19th century, but they didn't provide a complete picture of worker welfare. Average figures concealed variations between trades and fluctuations from year to year. For example, during the Napoleonic War, when prices rose sharply, the real value of worker earnings significantly decreased. Workers' income depended not only on the wage rate, but also on the period of employment, meaning the number of days worked determined their average daily income. At the best of times, until the mid-19th century, around 10% of the urban population were extremely poor, and during economic slumps, such as the 1830s, the proportion of unemployed individuals could rise to between 35 and 75% in different regions. The fear of unemployment made workers resistant to the introduction of new technology. When machines like the spinning jenny were introduced in the woolen industry, women who relied on hand spinning attacked the new machines, resulting in prolonged conflicts over their adoption. Please hit the like button. It morally supports us to keep making educational videos for the curriculum such as this. After the 1840s, building activity intensified in cities, offering more employment opportunities. Roads were widened, new railway stations and lines were constructed, tunnels were dug, drainage and sewers were laid, and rivers were embanked. The number of workers employed in the transport industry doubled in the 1840s and doubled again in the subsequent 30 years. Now, we shall explore the industrialization in India, focusing not only on factory industries, but also on the non-mechanized sector, primarily textile industries. We shall begin with Indian textiles. Before the age of machine industries, India's silk and cotton goods were dominant in the global textile market. Coarser cottons were produced in many countries, but the finer varieties often originated in India. Armenian and Persian merchants played a significant role in distributing Indian textiles to various regions, including Afghanistan, Eastern Persia, and Central Asia. A vibrant sea trade operated through key pre-colonial ports like Surat, Mehslipatam, and Hooghly. Indian merchants and bankers were deeply involved in this export trade network, financing production, facilitating the movement of goods, and supplying exporters. Supply merchants acted as intermediaries, linking port towns to inland regions. They provided advances to weavers, procured woven cloth, and transported the supplies to the ports. At the ports, Large shippers and export merchants had brokers who negotiated prices and purchased goods from the supply merchants operating inland. However, by the 1750s, this network, primarily controlled by Indian merchants, began to break down as European companies gradually gained power. They secured various concessions from local courts and eventually gained monopoly rights to trade. This shift in control resulted in the decline of traditional ports like Surat and Hooghly, the drying up of credit that had previously financed the trade, and the bankruptcy of local bankers. For instance, the gross value of trade that passed through Surat dropped from rupees 1 crore 60 lakh in the late 17th century to rupees 30 lakhs by the 1740s. While Surat and Hooghly dwindled, ports like Bombay and Calcutta grew, indicating the expansion of colonial power. Trade through these new ports came under the control of European companies, carried by European ships. Many old trading houses collapsed, and those who wanted to survive had to operate within a network shaped by European trading companies. This shift marked a profound change in the dynamics of trade in India. But Indian weavers faced a bitter fate during this era under British. The consolidation of East India Company power did not immediately lead to a decline in textile exports from India. British cotton industries had not yet expanded, and Indian fine textiles were in high demand in Europe. The company was eager to expand textile exports from India. Before establishing political power in Bengal and Carnatic in the 1760s and 1770s, the East India Company had difficulty ensuring a regular supply of goods for export. Competing with the French, Dutch, Portuguese, and local traders, the company found it challenging to secure woven cloth. To address this, they began to develop a system of management and control that eliminated competition, reduced costs, and ensured regular supplies of cotton and silk goods. The company took steps to gain control of the weaver. They appointed a paid supervisor called the Gomastha to oversee weavers, collect supplies, and inspect the quality of cloth. Weavers who accepted advances from the company were restricted from dealing with other buyers. The advances provided for the purchase of raw materials tied them to the company. Weaving became the primary occupation for many weavers, requiring the labor of the entire family. However, the new Gomastas, who were outsiders with no long-term social connections to the villages, began to treat weavers arrogantly. Clashes between weavers and Gomastas became common, and weavers lost the ability to bargain for prices and sell to different buyers. In response to these changes, some weavers deserted villages and migrated to areas where they had family connections. Others, along with village traders, revolted against the company and its officials. Many weavers refused to accept loans, closed down their workshops, and turned to agricultural labor. While British cotton industries developed, they began to worry about textile imports from other countries. They pressured the government to impose import duties on cotton textiles, ensuring that Manchester goods could sell in Britain without facing competition from abroad. Simultaneously, they convinced the East India Company to sell British manufactures in Indian markets. The result was a significant increase in exports of British cotton goods to India in the early 19th century. By the 1850s, Indian cotton weavers faced a double challenge. First, their export market collapsed, and second, the local market shrank as it was flooded with cheap Manchester imports. Produced by machines at lower costs, these imported cotton goods undermined the weavers' ability to compete. Reports from various weaving regions in India narrated stories of decline and desolation. By the 1860s, a new problem arose as weavers faced difficulties in obtaining a sufficient supply of raw cotton of good quality. The outbreak of the American Civil War disrupted cotton supplies from the U.S., leading Britain to turn to India. The increased demand for Indian raw cotton resulted in skyrocketing prices, making it unaffordable for weavers. In this situation, weaving became unsustainable. By the end of the 19th century, the weaving industry in India had to contend with yet another problem. Factories in India started production, flooding the market with machine-made goods. The survival of traditional weaving industries became increasingly challenging. In summary, The decline of textile exports from India was a complex process influenced by changes in the global textile market, the dominance of European trading companies, the introduction of British cotton goods, and the challenges faced by Indian weavers. As the demand for Indian textiles reduced, weavers grappled with financial hardships, the loss of bargaining power, and ultimately the threat of economic survival in the face of industrialization. Now, we shall discuss the establishment of factories in India during the 19th and early 20th centuries, focusing on key developments, early entrepreneurs, and the influx of workers. Who were the early entrepreneurs? Factories were set up in different regions of India by various groups of people, and their origins can be traced back to the trade with China. In the late 18th century, the British began exporting opium to China and importing tea from China to England. Many Indians became involved in this trade, providing finance, procuring supplies, and shipping consignments. Some of these traders went on to invest in industrial enterprises in India. Dwarkanath Tagore, who made his fortune in the China trade, later set up several joint stock companies in Bengal in the 1830s and 1840s. Other industrialists like Dinshaw Petit, Jamsetji Nusarwanji Tata, Seth Hukamchand, and G.D. Birla also earned their initial wealth through exports to China and raw cotton shipments to England. Capital was accumulated through various trade networks, including trade with Burma, links with the Middle East and East Africa, and commercial operations within India. When opportunities arose for industrial investment, many of these traders established factories. As colonial control over Indian trade increased, Indian merchants found their opportunities limited. They were prohibited from trading with Europe in manufactured goods, leading to restrictions on their activities. European managing agencies played a significant role in controlling Indian industries, with three major agencies, Birdheiglers and Ampide Company, Andrew Ewell, and Jardine Skinner and Ampol Co., mobilizing capital, forming joint stock companies, and making investment decisions. But the question arises, where did the workers come from? Factories required a workforce, and the demand for workers increased as the number of factories grew. Workers typically came from the districts surrounding the industrial regions. Peasants and artisans who couldn't find employment in their villages sought work in the growing industrial centers. For example, over 50% of workers in the Bombay cotton industries in 1911 came from the neighboring district of Ratnagiri, while the textile mills of Kanpur primarily employed people from within the Kanpur district. Workers often moved back and forth between their village homes and the city, returning during harvests and festivals. News of employment opportunities eventually led to workers traveling long distances in the hope of finding jobs in the mills. Workers from the United Provinces, for instance, went to work in the textile mills of Bombay and the jute mills of Calcutta. Securing jobs was challenging because the number of job seekers consistently exceeded the available positions. Entry into the mills was restricted, and industrialists typically employed jobbers, often experienced workers, to recruit new employees. Jobbers were influential, helping new workers settle in the city and providing support during crises. However, they also began demanding money and gifts for their services, which allowed them to wield significant control over the lives of the workers. Although the number of factory workers increased over time, they still represented a small proportion of the overall industrial workforce. The peculiarities of industrial growth were huge. Now, we will delve into the unique characteristics of industrial growth in India, focusing on the interests of European managing agencies, shifts in the Indian industrial landscape, the Swadeshi movement, and the impact of World War I. European managing agencies were interested in products primarily meant for export, such as tea, coffee, mining, indigo, and jute. Indian businessmen initially avoided competing with Manchester goods in the Indian market, choosing to produce coarse cotton yarn or exporting the yarn as high-quality yarn was imported. The industrial landscape began to change in the early 20th century as the Swadeshi movement gained momentum. Nationalists organized boycotts of foreign cloth, pressuring the government for tariff protection and other concessions. Additionally, the export of Indian yarn to China declined due to competition from Chinese and Japanese mills, leading Indian industrialists to shift from yarn to cloth production. World War I created a significant shift as British mills focused on war production, reducing Manchester imports into India. Indian mills gained a vast home market, and they were also called upon to supply goods for the war effort. Industrial production boomed during the war. Post-war, Manchester struggled to recapture its position in the Indian market, and the British economy faced challenges. Indian industrialists consolidated their position within the colonies, substituting foreign manufacturers and capturing the local market. Small-scale industries predominated then on. Following the war, large industries remained a small segment of the Indian economy. The majority of industries were small-scale, especially outside Bengal and Bombay. Registered factories employed only a small proportion of the total industrial labor force, with most workers in small workshops and household units, often hidden from plain sight. Interestingly, in some cases, handicraft production expanded, including the handloom sector, which almost tripled between 1900 and 1940. This expansion was partially due to technological changes, with weavers adopting new technology to improve production and reduce costs. The survival and growth of certain groups of weavers can be attributed to their ability to produce specialized and finer varieties of cloth. These products had more stable demand from the well-to-do, and mills couldn't easily replicate specialized weaves, such as saris with woven borders or famous lungis and handkerchiefs of Madras. Although weavers and other craftspeople worked hard and long hours, they were not relics of the past in the age of factories. Their lives and labor were integral to the process of industrialization. But all comes down to marketing of goods. Now, we will explore the strategies used to persuade people to buy new products and expand consumer markets during the industrial age. Advertising plays a key role in creating new consumers and shaping consumer culture. From the onset of the industrial age, advertisements have played a significant role in expanding product markets. British manufacturers selling cloth in India used labels on cloth bundles to indicate the place of manufacture and the company's name. These labels, aside from carrying text, often featured beautifully illustrated images. Notably, images of Indian gods and goddesses were commonly used on these labels. This was a way to associate products with divine approval and to make goods from foreign lands seem familiar to Indian consumers. By the late 19th century, manufacturers were printing calendars to popularize their products. Calendars were used even by illiterate people and were displayed in various settings, including tea shops and modest homes. They featured images of gods and revered figures, further emphasizing the link between the products and traditions. Important personages, including emperors and nawabs, were also depicted in advertisements and calendars, suggesting that products used by these figures were of exceptional quality. Indian manufacturers often used advertising to convey nationalist messages. Consumers were encouraged to buy products made by Indians as a demonstration of patriotism. These advertisements served as a vehicle for the Swadeshi message, emphasizing the importance of supporting Indian production. The industrial age brought significant technological changes and the growth of factories, yet hand technology and small-scale production continued to be integral to the industrial landscape. The images presented in this section illustrate the multifaceted strategies employed to appeal to consumers and expand product markets.